Why was she the only one on the plane who noticed? Sarah Martinez adjusted her sunglasses and pulled the baseball cap lower, her movements casual enough to look like habit, but precise enough to hide the truth. The truth was dangerous. The truth had no place on this flight. Her hands were too steady for a tourist in faded jeans and a t-shirt with peeling letters. The chatty businessman in the seat beside her couldn't see the steel beneath her skin. And that was the point. He was already asking what she did for work. She told him she was between jobs. Technically true. She'd resigned from the Air Force 2 weeks ago after a mission she'd never be allowed to speak of. He filled the silence with stories about his daughter's wedding. She nodded at the right moments, but her eyes drifted past him to the window, watching the ground crew with the same attention she once used on enemy patrols. Methodical, precise, disciplined. That rhythm was still in her blood. 8 years of flying the world's most advanced fighter jet didn't wash away. Just because she traded her flight suit for flip-flops, passengers continued to board, and her trained gaze picked out details others missed. The new flight attendant, nervous in her first days on international routes, the man in 1-4 kino bag, glances toward the cockpit door. Cheap suit, probably an air marshal. The elderly woman across the aisle, white-knuckled around a rosary, eyes fixed on the floor. Sarah had read people for survival, their fears, their tells, their secrets. Even here, she couldn't stop. The captain's voice came over the intercom, professional but edged with fatigue. The co-pilot's voice was brighter, probably eager to prove himself. They taxied toward the runway. Sarah tried to breathe the way her therapist had taught her. Tried to let herself just be a tourist. But the war hadn't ended. It had only moved inside her head, in the dark behind her eyes. The same reel played over and over, the emergency landing in hostile territory. The hours evading capture, the rescue that came just as her ammo ran out. She'd earned a medal for that mission. The kind that never made the news. The kind you... Locked in a drawer, General Morrison's voice still haunted her. You've been flying combat for 8 years straight. You're cracking. Now here she was, strapped into an economy seat, backpack at her feet with nothing more lethal than sunscreen and a camera she didn't know how to use. She told herself to read. She told herself to relax. But as the engines roared, she felt something. The faintest vibration during takeoff. A sound, just a shade off from what it should be. She told herself it was nothing. Commercial aircraft were maintained to impossible standards. And yet the old instinct whispered, don't ignore it. Hours later, she would remember that whisper. She would remember the moment she knew something was wrong before anyone else. But by then, 320 lives would already be hanging in the balance. And the woman in seat 23F would no longer be able to pretend she was just a tourist. What was it about silence that could feel heavier than sound? At 35,000 feet, with the Pacific spread endlessly below, Sarah had almost lulled herself into thinking the strange vibration during takeoff had been nothing more than her overactive instincts. Roger, the businessman beside her, had fallen asleep, his head tilted at an angle that looked like it might give him whiplash. The cabin had settled into the slow, soft rhythms of a long-haul flight. People flipped through novels, scrolled their phones, or surrendered to sleep. Sarah forced herself to focus on the page of the romance novel she'd grabbed from an airport shop. But the words swam in front of her. She kept glancing toward the left wing, telling herself she was being ridiculous. She wasn't here to assess threats anymore. She wasn't Viper. The call sign whispered only in briefing rooms. She was just another civilian passenger on her way to Australia. The captain's voice broke through the cabin, smooth but tired. Standard weather updates. Estimated arrival times. Nothing alarming. Sarah caught herself watching the silver-haired senior flight attendant as she passed calm face, confident. Stride, a professional. She let herself breathe a little easier until it happened at exactly 2:47 p.m. The world shifted. A deep, metallic crack ripped through the airframe. a sound Sarah's body recognized before her brain did. She'd heard it before, in places where it meant you had seconds to act before the sky swallowed you. The cabin lurched violently. A high-pitched shriek of air tore through the left side of the plane, followed by the sight that made her blood go cold. Through her oval window, she saw a jagged wound where the left engine should have been. Flames trailed behind the wing like a banner of fire. Shards of metal spun off into the void. The 777 rolled hard to the left, the sudden shift slamming her against her armrest. Oxygen masks dropped like yellow flowers, bobbing in the sudden chaos around her. Panic exploded. A man screamed behind her. A child wailed somewhere toward the back. Roger's eyes flew open in confusion, then terror. The elderly woman across the aisle gripped her rosary with so much force her knuckles turned bone white. Sarah's training engaged without permission. She scanned the situation the way she would in the first seconds of a combat emergency. Altitude still high, but dropping. Airspeed bleeding off fast, yaw. Severe to the left. Asymmetric thrust pulling them off course. Hydraulic systems. She could almost feel the sluggish, delayed control responses through the airframe. Not good. The young flight attendant she'd noticed earlier was frozen halfway down the aisle, eyes wide and unseeing. The silver-haired attendant, still composed but clearly rattled, barked orders for passengers to remain calm and put their masks on. The captain's voice came back, this time stripped of the easy calm from earlier. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have experienced a serious emergency. We've lost our left engine and are experiencing significant hydraulic failures. Please remain calm and follow the instructions of your flight attendants." Hydraulic failures. Sarah's stomach sank. She didn't need a manual to know what that meant without hydraulic pressure. Control surfaces were useless. You could have the best pilots in the world at the controls, but you'd still be flying a brick through the sky. The plane shuddered. Again, the ocean outside looked closer now. Too close. She heard the overstrain in the remaining engine's pitch. They were pushing it to compensate. Push it too hard, and they'd lose that one too. Then there'd be nothing but a silent glide into the water, a glide that would last less than 10 minutes. She unbuckled her belt. The silver-haired attendant blocked her path. "Ma'am, you need to sit down. What's your name?" Sarah asked sharply. The attendant blinked. Janet Morrison. "Janet, listen to me very carefully. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez, United States Air Force, retired. 3,000 flight hours, multiple combat recoveries. I need to speak to your pilots immediately." Janet hesitated. Even in the chaos, Sarah saw the flicker of hope in her eyes. She'd recognized the tone, the one you only heard from someone who knew exactly what they were doing under fire. "The cockpit is sealed during." "Then unseal it." Sarah cut in. "Because in about 15 minutes, will be nothing but debris on the ocean floor, unless someone in there knows how to fly without hydraulics." The plane lurched hard. Enough to send a beverage cart rolling free. Somewhere, someone was praying aloud. The ocean below no longer looked abstract. It had texture now. Whitecaps breaking against deep blue. Janet moved. She grabbed the intercom handset and spoke quickly to the cockpit. Sarah could hear voices beyond the reinforced door tight. Clipped, desperate. She knew that tone. She'd heard it in her own voice once, nursing a wounded fighter jet back over enemy lines. The door hissed open. Inside, Captain James Fletcher gripped the yoke with both hands, sweat darkening his collar. First Officer Lisa Chun, younger but no less tense, was flipping through emergency checklists, her eyes darting between flashing warning lights. "Who the hell are you?" Fletcher barked without looking up. "Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez, United States Air Force," she said, sliding into the jump seat like she'd died yesterday. "Retired. I've handled total control loss before. What's your status?" "Status?" Fletcher gave a bitter laugh. "Left engine gone. Complete hydraulic failure. Right engine overheating. Altitude dropping fast. We've got maybe 10 minutes. Sarah scanned the instruments. Numbers blurred into patterns, patterns into a plan. Have you tried differential thrust steering? What? Chum looked up, frowning. When you lose hydraulics, you can use the engines to steer. Increase thrust on one side to turn toward the other. I brought home an F-16 with half a wing using it. Physics doesn't change just because the plane's bigger. This isn't a fighter jet, Fletcher growled. No, Sarah said. But thrust is thrust, lift is lift. The scale's different. The principles aren't. Another violent shudder. The altimeter spun down past 18,000 feet. Outside, the ocean reached for them. Fletcher's eyes met hers for the first time. Whatever he saw there made him stop arguing. What do you need? First, stop fighting the yoke. Controls are dead weight. Lisa monitor engine tong. James, when I call for thrust changes, you give me exactly what I ask for. No hesitation? Nearest runway? Chun's voice was steady now. Darwin, military capable. Field, 11,000-foot runway. Perfect, Sarah said. They'll understand an unconventional approach. Fletcher keyed the radio. Darwin Tower, Oceanic 847. Catastrophic emergency. Complete hydraulic loss. 320 souls on board. Attempting military-assisted approach. The reply was instant. Oceanic 847, Darwin Tower. Emergency services on standby. Cleared for any approach. Godspeed. Sarah's hands moved to the engine controls, her mind stripping away everything. But the physics and the stakes. We're gonna fly this plane like a fighter jet. She said, it's going to be rough, it's going to hurt, but we're bringing her in. Neither pilot argued. Outside, the ocean surged upward toward them. Inside, the tourist in seat 23F was gone. In her place sat a combat pilot, staring down the impossible with cold, steady fire in her eyes. And for the first time since the explosion, Sarah Martinez smiled. What if this didn't work? Sarah didn't let herself linger on the thought, but it shadowed every movement. The cockpit was a storm of alarms, warning lights flashing like a desperate heartbeat. Fletcher's hands twitched toward the yoke-out. Of instinct, then stopped, remembering her order. Chun's eyes flicked from gauges to her face, looking for confirmation that this stranger, this supposed ex-Air Force pilot, wasn't about to kill them faster than gravity was. Sarah had no time for doubt. James, we need to start banking toward Darwin immediately. Lisa, keep me posted on our descent rate every 10 seconds. If we dip below our glide ratio sweet spot, we're done. Chun's voice was tight. Altitude, 14,800 feet. Descent rate, 1,500 feet per minute. Airspeed, dropping to 230 knots. Sarah, calculated fast. We can work with that, but we're burning engine 1 too hot, James. Back it down to 93%. No lower. That'll bleed speed, he warned. It'll save us 5 minutes of engine life. Without it, we don't reach land. His jaw tightened, but he followed her order. The Pacific stretched below, impossibly wide. Somewhere out there, a line of shoreline waited too far away for anyone else to believe they'd make it. But Sarah had spent years flying toward things everyone else thought unreachable. You've done this before? Chun asked suddenly, eyes flicking toward her, voice low. Once, Sarah said without looking up from the instruments. Afghanistan. Took a missile hit. Half my controls gone. Brought it home on thrust management and trim. And? Sarah glanced at her. And we landed, mostly in one piece. My crew chief still owes me a bottle of whiskey for that one. Chun's lips tightened, but there was the faintest flicker of a smile before she went back to her readings. The cockpit vibrated under another shudder, somewhere deep in the fuselage. Metal strained against forces it was never meant to endure. Sarah leaned forward, watching the artificial horizon. James, give me 2% more thrust on engine 1. Gentle. Now back 1%, feel that? Yeah. He frowned, feeling the sluggish yaw response. That's our steering, she said. We're gonna nurse her around like this. No sharp moves, no heroics, just patience and physics. A sharp crackling sound broke in over the radio. Oceanic. 847. Darwin Tower, confirm you are attempting hydraulic-free landing. Sarah keyed the mic herself. Darwin, affirmative. We'll be coming in hot, no flaps. No spoilers? I'll need your emergency crews ready with foam blankets along runway 11. Understood. 847, Godspeed. She replaced the mic, then sat back for half a second, just long enough for her brain to process the absurdity. 2 weeks ago, she'd been standing in General Morrison's office, holding her discharge papers, being told she needed to remember what she was fighting for. She hadn't expected the reminder to come at 35,000 feet over open ocean. With 320 strangers trusting her with their lives, Chun's voice broke in. Altitude 11,200. Descent rate climbing 1,800 feet per minute. Sarah's hands moved instantly. James, increase thrust to 95. Counter with right rudder. Trim. Don't fight the yoke, let the nose settle where it needs to. The 777 responded slowly, reluctantly, as if it too wasn't sure this would work. But the descent steadied. In the cabin behind them, Sarah could hear muffled cries, the rattle of unsecured luggage, the repeated PA announcements urging calm. She pictured the passengers, the old woman's knuckles white around her rosary, Roger's broad shoulders hunched against fear, the little boy somewhere in the back asking if they were going to crash. That was the part they didn't tell you about in training. Not the mechanics, not the procedures, but the weight of all those lives you'd never meet. Darwin's at your 11 o'clock, Chun announced. 50 miles out. Sarah squinted through the windscreen. The coastline was faint, a thin smudge between sea and sky. We're making it, she said, assuming the engine holds. Fletcher muttered, It will, Sarah said. She didn't add because it has to. The minutes stretched, each one measured in micro-adjustments of thrust. In Chun's altitude calls, in Fletcher's steady breathing beside her. Then another warning tone, engine temp rising past redline. Chun's voice sharpened. We're at 1,040 degrees on the EGT. Damn it, Sarah said. James, bring it down 2%, Lisa. Watch our descent like a hawk. We're gonna lose a little altitude buffer. The coastline was sharper now. Details emerging, Sarah could almost smell the fuel trucks. The hot asphalt of the runway. Darwin Tower. Oceanic 847. 30 miles. Out on emergency vector to runway 11. Fletcher radioed. The reply came back calm, steady. Oceanic 847. Runway is clear. Emergency crews in position. Winds calm. You are cleared to land any approach you require. Sarah didn't reply immediately. Her mind was busy running the landing in her head. Approach speed high. No flaps to slow, no spoilers to dump lift. They'd touch down like a stone skipping. Water, and have 11,000 feet to stop a plane that didn't want to stop. She'd done harder things. Not many, but a few. She keyed the mic. Darwin. We'll be coming in at approximately 190 knots. Expect brake smoke. Keep your rescue crews clear until full stop. Acknowledged. 847. We're with you. She sat back again, eyes fixed on the shrinking distance between them and the runway. The fear in the cockpit was still there. She could feel it radiating from Fletcher and Chun, but it was tempered now with something else. The kind of focus that only comes when you've stopped thinking about the odds and started thinking only about the next action. The next second, the next breath. Sarah knew that feeling. She lived in it. The land grew larger in the windows, green and ochre stretching back from the coast. The long, perfect ribbon of runway 11 stood out like a scar against the earth. They were going to try it, and, God willing, they were going to make it. What did it feel like to fly a plane that didn't want to live? Sarah had flown aircraft in every condition, imaginable storm-churned skies that bucked her jet like a toy. Sand-choked winds that stripped paint from the fuselage, thin mountain air that made the engines gasp for oxygen. But this was different. The 777 shuddered beneath her hands, like it was resisting survival, as if the machine itself had already surrendered to gravity. Altitude, 7,800. Descent rate, 1,900 feet per minute. Chun called out. Her voice was flat, controlled, but Sarah could hear the tension beneath it, like a thread stretched to its breaking point. James, ease the thrust down 0.5%. Sarah said, we need to balance engine temp with glide ratio. If we burn her out now, we won't even make the coast. Fletcher's jaw worked, but he obeyed. Adjusting the throttle with the care of someone defusing a bomb, the airframe responded with a slight change in pitch. Not enough to inspire confidence, just enough to say they were still in the fight. Outside the cockpit windows, the ocean filled. Every inch of the horizon, Sarah kept her eyes forward, not letting herself imagine what the water would feel like at 200 knots. Darwin Tower, Fletcher radioed. Oceanic 847 is 15 miles out. Descending through 7,500, one engine, no hydraulics. We're on military guidance. The response came immediately, clipped but calm. Oceanic 847. Darwin Tower, runway 11 clear. Emergency crews standing by. Foam trucks in position. You are priority 1. Foam trucks? Sarah pictured them waiting, thick white blankets laid across the asphalt to reduce the fireball if they came in too hot. She'd seen that kind of landing before. She'd never been the one flying it. Lisa, she said, double-check the manual brake release levers. If the automatic system fails, you'll deploy them manually on my command. Yes, ma'am. Chum's fingers moved without hesitation. Sarah shifted her grip on the engine controls, feeling the vibration through the levers. It wasn't the smooth hum of a healthy turbine. It was a labored, uneven tremor, like a runner with a pulled muscle. Darwin's visual, Fletcher said quietly. Sarah leaned forward. The coastline rose up from the blue, framed by clouds the color of steel. The runway was a long black line cutting through pale earth, flanked by clusters of red and yellow emergency vehicles. It looked impossibly narrow from this distance. Okay, Sarah said, her voice dropping into the calm, precise tone she'd used in briefing rooms. From here on, everything we do is about energy management. No sudden changes, no overcorrections. We'll carry more speed than we want because without flaps, that's the only way we keep lift, James. I'll be calling thrust changes in 1% increments. No freelancing. Lisa, call out every 100 feet once we pass 2,000. Both pilots nodded. The cabin PA clicked on. Fletcher's voice, steady despite the pounding in the cockpit. Ladies and gentlemen, we are on final approach into Darwin. Please remain seated with your seatbelts securely fastened and all belongings stowed. Follow crew instructions after landing. Thank you for your cooperation. He clicked off. You think they believe we're going to make it? They believe we're trying, Sarah said. That's enough for now. The altimeter ticked down. Altitude, 5,200. Descent rate steady at 1,700. Sarah nudged the thrust up 1%, watching the nose swing slightly right. Good. Hold it, we're compensating yaw perfectly here. The runway grew larger in the windshield. The sight filled her chest with something she didn't want to name, something dangerously close to hope. Her headset crackled. Oceanic 847. Of wind tower, we have wind shear reported at 500 feet. Light variable, caution advised. Sarah exhaled slowly. Of course we do, she muttered. What's the play if it kicks us off course? Fletcher asked. There is no play, Sarah said. We ride it out. Keep power steady, steer with thrust, and pray the wind doesn't shove us into the grass. The plane jolted as another gust hit. Sarah countered instantly with a hair more. Thrust to engine 1. feeling the yaw correction ripple through the airframe like a delayed heartbeat. Altitude 3,000, airspeed 195. Chum called. We're coming in hot. Fletcher said. We have to, Sarah reminded him. Without flaps, slower means stall. Stall means death. Chun's voice cut in again. 2,000 feet. Passing. 190 knots. Sarah's world narrowed to the strip of asphalt ahead and the numbers in her periphery. James, when I say flare, you give me a gentle nose-up, just enough to take the edge off the descent rate. No more than 2 degrees. He swallowed hard. Got it. 1,000, Chun announced. Sarah's hands were steady on the controls, her voice flat and sure. Hold her straight. Engine temp? Stable at 978. Good. She live. The runway rushed toward them. Sarah could see the flashing lights of the foam trucks, the bright jackets of the crews standing ready, the shimmer of heat off the tarmac. 500, Chung called. Brace, Sarah said simply. The 777 tore through the wind shear at 400 feet. The nose yawing left hard enough to make the frame groan. Sarah corrected instantly. Throttle up 1%, feeling the tail swing. Back into line, 200. Chun's voice was tighter now. Sarah leaned forward. Eyes locked on the far end of the runway. James. Flare. The nose lifted slightly. The descent rate eased, not much, but enough. The main gear slammed into the tarmac with a bone-rattling crash. The impact shuddered through the frame, sending overhead bins rattling and passengers gasping. Reverse. Thrust now. Sarah barked. Fletcher yanked the lever. Engine 1 roared. The sound a furious, straining howl. Brake chutes! Sarah called. Deployed. Chung shouted. The deceleration was brutal. Passengers were slammed forward into their restraints. Smoke poured from the landing gear as tires bit into the asphalt. Straining against speed they were never meant to handle. Ground speed, 150, 140. Chung was calling numbers like prayers. The end of the runway rushed toward them. 60. The plane juddered, its momentum fighting to keep it moving. 40. The last of their speed bled away, and the giant machine came to a stop. Just 200 meters short of the overrun. For a moment, the only sound in the cockpit was the hiss of cooling metal and 3 people breathing hard. Then Fletcher laughed short, incredulous, almost wild. Chun let out a sob that was equal parts relief and disbelief. Sarah just sat there, staring down the runway. Her hands were steady, but her chest felt hollow. They had made it. But she knew it would be a long time before she believed it. Why did survival sometimes feel quieter than death? The moment the 777 stopped moving, the world seemed to hold its breath. No alarms, no engine roar. Just the hiss of heat escaping through stressed metal and the faint clicking of cooling systems. Winding down. For a heartbeat, Sarah thought the silence was going to crush her more than the noise had. Then came the first sob from the cabin. It was small, muffled by distance, but it set off a ripple of voices, shuddering breaths, the scrape of seatbelts unbuckling too soon. The silver-haired flight attendant, Janet, came over the intercom, with the authority of someone who drilled for this 100 times. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated until instructed to move by the crew. We will begin evacuation shortly. Outside the cockpit windows, Darwin's runway swarmed with life. Phone trucks rolled toward them in perfect formation. There, high-visibility stripes flashing in the late afternoon sun. Firefighters in heavy gear jogged alongside ambulances. Beyond the cordon, Sarah saw people gathered: airport staff, ground crew, maybe even locals who had heard the emergency call and come to watch either a miracle or a tragedy. Her headset crackled. Oceanic 847. This is Darwin Tower. Congratulations on your landing. Emergency crews are approaching. Advise when ready. For evacuation, Fletcher handled the response, his voice steadier now. Copy, Darwin. Crew is securing aircraft. Stand by for evac. He turned to Sarah. I don't even know what to say. Don't say anything yet, she said, her eyes still scanning the instrument panel out of habit. You've still got passengers on board. Your job isn't over until they're all off this plane. Chun gave a short laugh that sounded almost like disbelief. I'll never look at asymmetric thrust the same way again. Sarah allowed herself the smallest smile. Physics is physics, even when it's terrifying. Janet's voice came from the doorway. We're ready for passenger evacuation. Slides are armed. She paused, her eyes meeting Sarah's. You coming with us? In a minute, Sarah said. Make sure they all get off first. Fletcher frowned. Media's going to want to talk to you. You saved. I didn't save anyone. Sarah interrupted, her tone final. I flew a plane. You both kept your heads. Janet kept the cabin from falling apart. The rest? Luck and good metal. Bull, Fletcher said quietly, but he didn't push it. The evacuation began in an orderly chaos. The slides inflated with a heavy hiss, billowing in the warm air. Passengers, some sobbing, some numb, stepped into the blinding daylight, guided by shouting ground crew. Sarah glimpsed the elderly woman with the rosary being helped down the slide by a firefighter. Her lips still moving in silent prayer. Roger came next. His face pale, but his hand gripping a crumpled air sickness bag like it was some kind of talisman. From her seat in the jump seat, Sarah watched them go. Each face was etched into her mind, not as strangers, but as people who had been part of this fragile, improbable survival. She didn't know their names. She didn't need to. The cabin emptied quickly. The smell of burnt rubber and scorched hydraulics lingered in the air, a reminder of how close they'd come. When the last passenger disappeared down the slide, Sarah stood. She unbuckled her harness, her movements slow now that the adrenaline was bleeding out of her system. The sudden weight of exhaustion pressed into her bones. She stepped into the cabin, now eerily quiet. Bits of luggage lay scattered in the aisles. A lone paperback, its spine broken, rested on a seat. Somewhere near the back, a child's stuffed koala sat abandoned on the floor. At the forward exit, Fletcher was talking to an airport official, gesturing toward the cockpit. The man glanced at Sarah, clearly curious. She felt the itch of recognition coming from him, someone who'd heard the radio calls, who knew she wasn't just another passenger. She kept moving outside. The air was heavy with heat and the scent of jet fuel. The emergency crews were still in motion, spraying cooling foam on the landing gear, checking the fuselage for damage. Beyond them, the news cameras were already being set up. Microphones bobbed above a line of reporters, straining to get closer. Janet caught up to her. You're not going to give a statement? Sarah shook her head. I'm not the story. You are the story. Not for me, Sarah said. Let the captain talk. Let the airline take the spotlight. My job's done. Janet looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Sarah's face stopped her. She just nodded. Thank you, she said softly. Sarah gave a single nod in return and kept walking, slipping into the organized chaos of the tarmac, using the movement of crews and the distraction of the media to disappear. By the time the reporters swarmed the captain for interviews, she was already inside the terminal, past security, heading for a quiet corner where her backpack waited. She slid it over her shoulders, the familiar weight grounding her. No one stopped her. No one asked for her name outside. The late afternoon light slanted through the wide glass windows of Darwin Airport. Somewhere out there, 320 people were alive because of decisions she'd made in a cockpit. She didn't need the cameras to tell her that. She checked the departures. Board. There was a flight to Alice Springs in 2 hours, another to Cairns after that. Plenty of places to disappear, and she intended to. How long could you outrun a story before it caught up to you? 3 days after the landing, Sarah was in Alice Springs, not because she had planned it that way, but because it was the first place she could disappear without anyone asking too many questions. In the shadow of the McDonnell Ranges, She could blend into the stream of backpackers and road trippers who came here for red earth and big skies. Her baseball cap and faded jeans didn't stand out. Neither did her quiet nature. She rented a tiny room above a cafe, the kind with peeling paint on the balcony railing and a fan that wobbled dangerously when it turned. From that balcony, she could watch the street below locals riding dusty bikes, tourists heading toward the bus stop, the occasional rattling ute with the windows down and music loud. It was ordinary, comfortingly ordinary, but ordinary didn't silence the images in her head. The moment the engine blew, the metallic groan of a plane fighting gravity, the whitecaps rushing closer. She hadn't dreamed of her last combat mission since the landing. Now, it was the 777 that visited her at night. She told herself it was just adrenaline working its way out of her system. Told herself she'd done this before, survived something extraordinary, and walked away without letting it own her. But those other missions? She'd had a debriefing, a squadron, a system that understood the weight you carried afterward. Here, she had no one. Just the thin walls of a room that smelled faintly of dust and coffee, and a balcony where she sat at night with a cup of tea, watching the horizon fade to black. The first letter came 2 weeks later. It arrived in a plain white envelope, forwarded from a P.O. box she used for her few scattered civilian contacts. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper and careful handwriting. I don't know your name. I'm not even sure you'll get this. But you were on that plane. I saw you go toward the cockpit when everyone else was frozen. My wife and I, we have 2 daughters. We're home with them because of you. I hope you're okay. No signature. Just a shaky pen line where the writer had stopped himself from saying more. She read it twice, then a third time, then folded it carefully and set it on the small desk beside her bed. The second letter arrived 3 days later. This one had a photograph tucked inside, a newborn swaddled in a hospital blanket. Eyes squeezed shut against the camera flash. The note was only one sentence. You made it possible for him to meet his dad. After that, they came steadily, sometimes 2 or 3 in a week. A wedding invitation, a drawing from a child, a crude, cheerful picture of an airplane with a stick-figure woman smiling from the cockpit window, a postcard from a couple in Greece, thanking her for more sunsets. None of them used her name. Most didn't even know it. But they knew she'd been there, that she'd acted when no one else could. She bought a shoebox from the small general store down the street and began keeping the letters there. It sat on the floor beside her bed, next to a smaller box of air force medals she rarely looked at. Some nights, when the dreams were worse than usual, she'd take out a letter or two and read them until her pulse slowed. It wasn't closure, not exactly, but it was something. And yet, every time she left her room, there was a tension at the base of her neck, a prickle that came from knowing the story was out there now, told and retold in ways she couldn't control. The headlines had been unavoidable in the first days after. Darwin, miracle landing in Australia, passenger with military training saves 320. Life angle in flip-flops. Heroic woman disappears after Darwin dramatist seen her own blurry photograph in one paper, taken from a passenger's phone as she'd walked down the aisle toward the cockpit. Baseball cap, souvenir t-shirt, backpack straps over both shoulders. No smile. They'd gotten the rest wrong. They always did. She kept moving, changing cafes when she noticed the same faces too often, avoiding tourist bars where someone might decide to play amateur detective after a few drinks. She didn't want the story to find her. It wasn't humility. It was self-preservation, because she knew what happened to people who started believing they were heroes. One evening, just after sunset, she was sitting on her balcony with a cup of tea when the cafe owner's teenage son appeared with an envelope. "This came for you," he said, curious but polite enough not to ask questions. It wasn't a letter this time. It was a small, square photograph. 3 people stood in front of a suburban house, an older woman, a man in his 30s, and a boy of about 7. The boy was holding a handmade sign in bright marker. "Thank you for bringing Daddy home." On the back, in neat handwriting. "You don't have to answer. Just know we remember." Sarah sat with the photograph in her lap for a long time. The tea went cold. In another life, she might have gone to meet them, might have stood awkwardly in their doorway, shaking hands, smiling politely as they tried to put their gratitude into words. But she knew that door opened to a place she couldn't live in anymore. She slid the photo into the shoebox with the others, then closed the lid. The war was over, but she was still moving through the world like it wasn't. How many times could you blend into a crowd before someone's eyes found you? Sarah had been in Alice Springs for almost 2 months when it happened. The day began like any other. A walk to the cafe for a flat white, a stop at the newsstand for a local paper, and then a seat in the corner by the window where she could watch the street without being watched in return. Her cap was low, her clothes unremarkable, her posture relaxed enough to look like any other traveler passing through. But you can only control so much. She just started reading an article about an upcoming Outback festival when the bell above the cafe door jingled and a family stepped inside. They were dressed like tourist sun hats, camera straps, a paper map folded awkwardly in the father's hands. The mother was scanning the menu board, the father glancing toward the counter. It was the boy who noticed her. He couldn't have been more than 10, but his gaze lingered just a beat too long. Sarah didn't think much of it at first kid's stare. But then his eyes widened in the way people's eyes do when they connect two pieces of a puzzle. He tugged at his father's sleeve, whispered something. The father's head turned. Sarah knew that looked too well. The recognition creeping in, the mental flipbook of memory, pulling up an image from somewhere it didn't belong. The man's face changed. Not angry, not aggressive. Just intent. He left his family at the counter and crossed the room toward her table. "You were on that flight." His voice was low but certain. "Oceanic 847. Darwin." Sarah didn't move. "I think you've got the wrong person." "I don't." He said, "My wife and I were in row 21. You walked right past us on your way to the cockpit. We watched you disappear through that door, and we didn't see you again until we were on the runway, alive." He stopped, as if expecting her to confirm it, to acknowledge the memory they shared. Sarah sipped her coffee instead. "You remember a lot for a stressful day. You saved my wife and daughter." The words were quiet, but they landed like a weight on the table between them. "And you vanished before anyone could thank you." "That was the point," Sarah said softly. The man's jaw tightened. "Why?" "Because I'm not your story," she replied. "Your story is that you made it home. That's what matters." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "We've been carrying this in case we saw you again, my wife. She wanted you to have it." He set it on the table, nodded once, and walked back to his family. Sarah didn't open it right away. She finished her coffee, eyes on the street, waiting until the family left before she picked it up, back in her small room above the cafe. She tore the flap. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in looping handwriting. "You don't know me, but you saved me. More than that, you saved the life my daughter will grow into knowing her mother. I don't know why you don't want to be found. I just hope you know there are people out here who think of you more than you think of us. And we're grateful, always." Sarah folded the letter carefully and placed it in the shoebox with the others. The box was nearly full now, wedding invitations, postcards, drawings, photographs, a strange archive of a life she'd touched but never stepped into. She thought about leaving Alice Springs that night. The recognition had been too close, too casual. If one person could place her, another might follow, and the next might not respect her silence. But something in that letter anchored her. Not the gratitude, it was never about that, but the truth tucked in the words. "More than you think of us." It had been months since the landing, and still she thought of it every day. Maybe they did too. For the first time, She wondered if disappearing was really the same as moving on. That night, she walked to the edge of town, where the streetlights faded into open desert. The stars above were scattered so thickly they seemed to press closer, as if they might drop into her hands. She stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet. In the darkness, she admitted something she hadn't let herself say aloud. She was tired of running. Not from the media, not from passengers who wanted to thank her. Those were easy enough to avoid. She was running from the part of herself that still answered to Viper, the part that still calculated angles and speeds in her head, the part that still measured every room for exits. The war had been over for months, but she hadn't stopped living like it wasn't. Maybe she couldn't. When she returned to her room, she pulled the shoebox from beneath the bed. She spread the letters and photos across the blanket. She read each one again, slowly, as if their weight might shift in her hands if she held them long enough. By the time she put them away, a decision had begun to take shape, not a dramatic one. Not the kind they'd put in headlines, just a quiet change in direction. If she was going to keep moving, maybe it didn't have to be to hide. Maybe it could be to look for something that wasn't survival, wasn't combat, wasn't the cockpit at 35,000 feet. Something worth landing for. What if the only way to honor the past was to stop living in it? Sarah left Alice Springs before dawn. She packed lightly, she always did. A few changes of clothes, the worn guidebook she still hadn't finished reading, her camera, and the shoebox. Of letters, that last one was the only thing that ever made her luggage feel heavy. She slipped it into the bottom of the backpack. Beneath the sunscreen and the battered souvenir patches she kept adding to without thinking. The streets were still empty when she stepped outside. The air was cool, the kind of chill that came before the desert heat arrived in full force. She walked past the cafe without looking in, past the newsstand where she'd bought papers she never read all the way through, past the bus stop where tourists waited to be taken to the gorges. She didn't say goodbye. Not because she didn't care, but because she didn't want the act of leaving to be anyone else's memory. At the station, she bought a ticket south. No one asked where she was coming from. No one asked why. She sat in the farthest corner of the platform and watched the sun rise over the ranges, burning the edges of the sky into orange. When the train came, she boarded without fanfare. Her seat was near the window. The land unrolled outside in shades of rust and gold, punctuated by the occasional windmill or solitary gum tree. She let the motion lull her into stillness. For hours, she thought about nothing, and then inevitably she thought about everything: the flight, the explosion, the cold certainty in the cockpit. The way Fletcher's voice had steadied when he realized she wasn't guessing. The look in Chun's eyes when they touched down. The way the passengers had emerged into the sunlight. Blinking and alive, she remembered the boy in the cafe, the letter in his father's hand. "We think of you more than you think of us." It was true. She had worked for years to not think about those she saved. In the military, you learn quickly that dwelling on the faces slowed you down, made you hesitate. You kept your focus forward, because looking back meant seeing the ones you hadn't been able to save. But now, there was no mission ahead, no next sortie, no war to point her toward tomorrow. So maybe, just maybe, it was time to let herself look back without fear of being pulled under. By the time the train reached the next station, she'd decided where she was going. Not a city, not a tourist hub, a place she'd seen only once before, on a reconnaissance flight over the Northern Territory. Small, quiet, surrounded by nothing but sky. She would go there, stay long enough to breathe without feeling the air was borrowed, and see if she could learn to live without scanning every horizon for trouble. The journey took days, planes, buses, stretches of walking with the weight of the sun pressing into her shoulders. She kept to herself, spoke only when needed, and listened more than she talked. That part had always come naturally when she finally arrived. It was exactly as she remembered: low buildings, a single dirt airstrip, a pub that doubled as the town's unofficial meeting place. She found a small room to rent above the pub. The window looked out over the airfield, where a few single-engine planes sat under the glare of the midday sun. She told herself she wasn't here for flying. And yet, each morning she found herself on the balcony, watching the mechanics work, listening to the distant hum of propellers. Days passed. She walked the dirt roads. She learned the patterns of the locals, the farmer who came into town every Wednesday for supplies, the teacher who taught all 10 of the school students in a single classroom, the woman at the pub who knew everyone's drink before they asked. No one here recognized her. No one asked questions she didn't want to answer. And slowly, without her noticing, the silence began to feel less like an absence and more like a presence. One evening, she carried the shoebox out to the edge of the airstrip. She sat on the warm ground and opened it, laying each letter, each photograph, each drawing out in front of her. The paper fluttered slightly in the breeze. She read them all, not quickly, not as if she were bracing herself. She read them as if they were meant to be read, with the full weight of the lives they carried. When she finished, she packed them away again and closed the box. She didn't put it back under the bed. Instead, she set it on the windowsill, where the fading light caught the edges. She didn't know if she'd keep moving. She didn't know if she'd stay. But she knew this. She wasn't running anymore. The war inside her hadn't ended. It probably never would. But for the first time, she felt the possibility that she could live alongside it without letting it define her. She leaned back on her elbows, watching the last plane of the day lift off the dirt strip. Its shadow skimmed over the ground, then vanished into the open sky. Sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't sign its name or stand in front of cameras. Sometimes, dignity just acts, then walks away, leaving only the quiet and the knowledge that, for one day, the world was better because you were there. And that was enough.